What would you do if you discovered your perfect marriage was built on lies? Sarah Mitchell thought she had everything: a $5 million mansion, a tech mogul husband worth $50 million, and the kind of life people dream about. But when a late-night phone call from her best friend shattered her world, Sarah learned that the man she'd loved for 8 years had been living a double life. The affair was just the beginning. What Sarah discovered next would destroy everything she thought she knew about love, loyalty, and the man she'd trusted with her entire future. Because David Reynolds wasn't just cheating on his wife, he was involved in something far more dangerous than Sarah could have ever imagined. This is the true story of how a woman who lost everything, her marriage, her home, her unborn child, and her identity, fought back against a criminal conspiracy that reached the highest levels of Silicon Valley. It's a story about betrayal so deep it defies belief, revenge so sweet it changes everything, and the shocking moment when Sarah realized that sometimes the people trying to destroy your life are actually trying to save it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story begins with a phone call at 11:47 p.m., and by the time it ends, you'll understand why sometimes losing everything is the only way to discover who you really are. Sarah Mitchell stood in her $5 million mansion's marble foyer, adjusting the fresh white orchids for the third time that morning. Everything had to be perfect for tonight's dinner party. The tech industry's most influential couples would be dining at her table. And as the wife of David Reynolds, Silicon Valley's newest golden boy, she knew all eyes would be on their home. The morning California sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the custom interior design work that had built her reputation over the past 8 years. Each piece carefully chosen, each room a testament to her artistic vision. Sarah had poured her heart into creating the perfect life, the perfect home, the perfect marriage. "Honey, have you seen my phone?" David's voice echoed from the kitchen, carrying that slight edge of irritation that had become more frequent lately. Sarah walked toward the sound, her heels clicking against the Italian marble. At 32, she still turned heads with her auburn hair and green eyes, though lately she wondered if her husband noticed. David stood by the espresso machine, frantically patting his suit pockets. "It's on the counter by your keys," Sarah said, pointing to the sleek black device. "You left it there when you came in last night." David grabbed the phone quickly, almost protectively. The gesture struck Sarah as odd, but she pushed the thought away. He had been working incredibly hard since TechFlow. His artificial intelligence startup had gone public 6 months ago. The company was now worth $50 million, transforming them from comfortable to wealthy beyond their wildest dreams. "Big day today?" Sarah asked, pouring herself coffee from their expensive machine. "Board meeting at 10, then lunch with the investors from Goldman Sachs." David's fingers moved rapidly across his phone screen. "I might be late tonight. You know how these things go." Sarah nodded, though a small part of her felt disappointed. They had planned this dinner party together, their first major social event since the company's success. She had spent weeks coordinating every detail. "Will you be here for the dinner at least?" she asked, trying to keep her tone light. "Of course," David said, but his eyes never left his phone. "This is important for both of us." The device buzzed with an incoming message, and Sarah caught a glimpse of David's expression. His face softened in a way she hadn't seen directed at her in months. A small smile played at the corners of his mouth as he typed a response. "Who's texting you so early?" Sarah asked casually. "Just work stuff," David replied quickly, shoving the phone into his jacket pocket. "You know how it is." But Sarah did know how it was, and work messages had never made David smile like that. She watched as he grabbed his Tesla keys and briefcase, moving with an energy and excitement that used to be reserved for her. "I love you," she called as he headed toward the garage. "You too," came his distracted reply. Already mentally elsewhere, alone in their spacious kitchen, Sarah felt the familiar pang of loneliness that had been growing stronger each day. Success was supposed to bring them closer together, not drive them apart. She remembered when David used to linger over coffee, when they would plan their days together, when he would kiss her goodbye like he meant it. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. Jessica Torres appeared on the caller ID, and Sarah felt her mood lift slightly. Her best friend since college always knew exactly when she needed to talk. "Hey, Jess," Sarah answered, settling onto one of the leather bar stools. "Sarah, we need to talk." Jessica's voice was serious, lacking its usual warmth. Can you meet me for lunch today? Is everything okay? You sound strange. There was a pause on the other end. Jessica worked as an investigative journalist for the San Francisco Chronicle, and Sarah had learned to recognize the tone she used when she was onto a big story. Just meet me at Cafe Luna at noon. Okay, and Sarah, don't mention this to David. The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at her phone with a growing sense of unease. Jessica had never asked her to keep secrets from David before. They were all friends, had been for years. Sarah spent the morning trying to focus on last-minute preparations for the dinner party. She reviewed the menu with their caterer, arranged for additional parking, and confirmed the wine delivery. But Jessica's mysterious call nagged at her throughout each task. At 11:30, she drove her Mercedes through the winding hills of Marin County toward the small cafe where she and Jessica often met. The familiar drive usually calmed her nerves, but today each mile felt heavier than the last. Cafe Luna was nearly empty when Sarah arrived. Jessica sat in their usual corner booth, her laptop closed and her expression grim. As a journalist, Jessica had developed an ability to mask her emotions, but Sarah could read the tension in her friend's shoulders. You're scaring me, Sarah said as she slid into the booth. What's going on? Jessica reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. I've been working on a story about tech industry executives and their personal lives. It started as a fluff piece about power couples, but she trailed off, her brown eyes filled with sympathy. But what? Sarah, I found something about David, something you need to see. Jessica opened the envelope and pulled out several printed photographs. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as she saw the first image. David, unmistakably David, sitting at an intimate restaurant table with a stunning blonde woman. His hand was covering hers, his expression tender and focused in a way that made Sarah's stomach clench. Who is she? Sarah whispered. Her name is Amber Wild. She's an Instagram influencer, trying to break into acting, about 26 years old. Jessica's voice was gentle but firm. There are more photos, Sarah, from different days, different places. The next photo showed David and Amber walking hand in hand down a Santa Monica pier. Another captured them kissing outside what appeared to be a luxury hotel. In every image, David looked happy, animated, alive in a way Sarah hadn't seen in months. How long? Sarah asked, her voice barely audible. Based on what I've found, at least 6 months, maybe longer. 6 months. Sarah felt the world tilt around her. 6 months of late meetings and investor dinners and business trips. 6 months of her husband lying to her face while she planned their perfect life. Sarah, I'm so sorry, Jessica said, reaching across the table. I debated whether to tell you, but you deserve to know the truth. Sarah stared at the photographs, memorizing every detail. Amber was everything she wasn't. Younger, blonde, with the kind of effortless beauty that graced magazine covers. She had the look of someone who lived for adventure, for excitement, for the kind of spontaneous passion that Sarah's carefully ordered life had somehow lost. The dinner party, Sarah said suddenly. Tonight, all those people are coming to our house. Cancel it, Jessica said immediately. Call David now and confront him. But Sarah shook her head. A strange calm was settling over her, replacing the initial shock. No, I need to think about this. I need to figure out what I'm going to do. Sarah, you can't pretend everything is normal. I'm not pretending anything, Sarah replied, sliding the photos back into the envelope. I'm planning. As she drove home, Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. David had built his fortune, but she had built their life. Every social connection, every business relationship that mattered, every detail of their success had her fingerprints on it. If David thought he could simply discard her for a younger model, he was about to learn how much he had underestimated his wife. The dinner party would go on as planned, but it would be the last perfect evening David Reynolds would ever take for granted. The dinner party proceeded flawlessly, just as Sarah had planned. The crystal gleamed under the chandelier light, the wine flowed perfectly, and the conversation buzzed with the energy of Silicon Valley's elite. Sarah played her role to perfection, the gracious hostess, the supportive wife, the woman who had everything. But throughout the evening, she watched David with new eyes. She noticed how often he checked his phone, how his attention seemed divided even while entertaining their most important guests. When Margaret Steinberg, the wife of a major venture capitalist, complimented their beautiful home, David barely acknowledged the praise that should have made him proud. Sarah has such incredible taste, Margaret continued. David, you're so lucky to have someone who can create this kind of atmosphere for your business relationships. Mm-hmm, David replied absently, his fingers moving under the table where he thought no one could see. Sarah knew he was texting. After the last guest departed at nearly midnight, Sarah began clearing the dinner dishes with mechanical precision. David had disappeared upstairs, claiming exhaustion, but she could hear him talking quietly on the phone in his home office. The tone was intimate, affectionate, nothing like the way he spoke to her anymore. When David finally came to bed, Sarah was sitting up against the headboard, still in her black cocktail dress. The manila envelope lay on the comforter between them. "We need to talk," she said quietly. David's eyes immediately went to the envelope. Even in the dim bedroom light, she could see the color drain from his face. "Sarah, what's that?" "I think you know what it is." She pulled out the first photograph and held it up. "Her name is Amber Wild, 26 years old, Instagram influencer." David stood frozen in the doorway, his mouth opening and closing without sound. Sarah had seen him give presentations to rooms full of executives, negotiate million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. She had never seen him speechless. "How long?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rage building inside her chest. "Sarah, I can explain." "How long?" "David." He sat heavily on the edge of the bed, his head in his hands. 6 months, maybe 7. "Maybe 7, Sarah repeated. "You don't even remember when you started cheating on your wife." "It wasn't supposed to happen," David said, looking up at her with what appeared to be genuine anguish. "I met her at that tech conference in Los Angeles. She was covering the event for some lifestyle blog. We started talking, and she was so—" He trailed off. "So what? So excited about everything. So full of energy and curiosity about the business, about life. She made me feel—" David struggled for words. "Feel what that your wife of 8 years couldn't make you feel. Alive," he whispered. "She made me feel alive again." The words hit Sarah like physical blows. She had given David everything. Her career ambitions had taken a back seat to supporting his dreams. Her own social connections had become networking opportunities for his business. Her creativity and energy had been poured into building the perfect foundation for his success. "So I make you feel dead?" Sarah asked. "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" "David. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're saying that I'm boring, that I'm not enough for you anymore." David was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his words shattered what remained of Sarah's heart. "We've become roommates. Sarah, we go through the motions. But when was the last time we had a real conversation? When was the last time you surprised me or challenged me or made me laugh? When was the last time you gave me the chance?" Sarah shot back. "When was the last time you put down your phone during dinner? When was the last time you asked me about my work, my dreams, my life?" "Your life is my life," David said. "Everything you do revolves around supporting my career. Because that's what partners do. That's what marriage means." "But it doesn't have to be everything," David said, his voice gaining strength. "Amber has her own passions, her own goals. She's building her own brand, her own career. She's independent." Sarah stared at her husband, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. "You want someone independent while I make myself dependent on you. You want someone exciting while I create stability for you. You want someone who surprises you while I anticipate your every need." "Or Sarah." "No," she said, standing up. "You don't get to explain this away. You don't get to make this my fault because I wasn't entertaining enough for you." David stood as well, reaching toward her. "I don't want a divorce. We can work through this. Amber was a mistake, a distraction. You and I built something together." "Yes, we did, and you threw it away for someone who makes you feel alive." "I'll end it," David said desperately. "I'll cut off all contact with her. We can go to counseling. We can take a trip, reconnect, remember why we fell in love." For a moment, Sarah felt a flicker of hope. Maybe David was right. Maybe they could rebuild what they had lost. Maybe the marriage was worth fighting for. You'd really end it with her. Absolutely. Right now. I'll call her right now and tell her it's over. Sarah watched as David pulled out his phone and dialed. She heard the call connect, heard Amber's voice answer with a sleepy, "Hey, baby." "Amber, we need to talk," David said, his eyes on Sarah. "This thing between us, it has to end. My wife found out, and I need to focus on my marriage." Sarah couldn't hear Amber's response clearly, but the tone was sharp, angry. David walked to the far side of the room, lowering his voice. "No, you don't understand," he said quietly. "I can't do this anymore." But as Sarah watched her husband's face during the phone call, she saw something that crushed her remaining hope. Even as he spoke the words of ending the affair, his expression was pained, reluctant. He wasn't ending a mistake. He was sacrificing something he valued. When David hung up and turned back to her, Sarah knew the truth. "You're in love with her," she said. "Sarah, I chose you. I just proved that." "No, you chose the easy path. You chose to try to keep both of us rather than make a real decision." David's silence confirmed what Sarah already knew. Her marriage was over, had been over for months while she lived in denial. The perfect life she had built was crumbling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. "I want you to sleep in the guest room tonight," Sarah said quietly. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." David nodded, gathering his pillows and some clothes. At the bedroom door, he paused. "Sarah, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you." "But you did hurt me," she replied. "And you'll hurt me again if I let you." After David left, Sarah sat alone in their king-sized bed, surrounded by the expensive sheets and designer furniture that had once represented everything she wanted. Now it all felt hollow, meaningless. The life she had worked so hard to create had been built on a foundation that was already cracking. Sarah picked up the photos of David and Amber, studying them again in the lamplight. In every image, David looked like a man who had found something precious. When he looked at her, Sarah realized he had the expression of a man going through the motions. Tomorrow would bring lawyers and financial discussions and the practical dissolution of 8 years together. But tonight, Sarah allowed herself to grieve not just for her marriage, but for the woman she had become in service to it. Somewhere along the way, she had lost herself in the pursuit of David's dreams. It was time to remember who she used to be and figure out who she wanted to become. 3 weeks after David moved into the guest room, Sarah stared at the plastic stick in her hands, watching as 2 pink lines appeared. Pregnant, after 3 years of trying, countless fertility treatments, and specialists who had warned them it might never happen naturally. She was finally pregnant. The irony was devastating. The baby she and David had dreamed about, planned for, and spent thousands of dollars trying to conceive had finally decided to arrive just as their marriage was falling apart. Sarah sank onto the bathroom floor, her back against the cool marble wall. They had talked about children constantly during their early years together. David had wanted a large family, had spoken about teaching his sons about business and taking his daughters to father-daughter dances. Sarah had imagined herself pregnant, glowing, sharing the miracle of growing life with the man she loved. Instead, she was alone in a bathroom that suddenly felt like a prison, holding the answer to their prayers at the worst possible moment. She heard David's voice downstairs, talking to someone on the phone. Over the past weeks, he had made an effort to be home more often, to have dinner with her, to pretend they were working toward reconciliation, but Sarah knew he was still in contact with Amber. She had seen the subtle signs his phone face down during meals, mysterious smiles at incoming messages, the way he sometimes seemed distracted even during their most serious conversations about their future. "Sarah," David's voice called from the bottom of the stairs. "Dinner's ready." She had made dinner reservations at their favorite restaurant, hoping to create the right atmosphere for the conversation they needed to have. She had planned to tell him about the pregnancy over candlelight and wine, had imagined his face lighting up with joy and possibility. "Coming," she called back, her voice steadier than she felt. David was waiting by the front door in his best suit, looking handsome and familiar. For a moment, Sarah could almost pretend they were still the couple they used to be. "You look beautiful," David said, and she could hear the effort he was making to rebuild their connection. At Chez Laurent, their usual table overlooked the San Francisco Bay. The same table where David had proposed 4 years earlier, where they had celebrated his first big contract, where they had toasted their hopes and dreams. The maitre d' knew them by name, and the waiter brought David's preferred wine without being asked. "I'm glad we're doing this," David said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I know these past few weeks have been difficult, but I think we're making progress." Sarah looked down at their joined hands. David's wedding ring caught the candlelight, and she wondered if he had been wearing it during his dates with Amber. "David, I need to tell you something important." Something in her tone made him straighten in his chair. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant." The words hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. David's face went through a series of expressions: shock, confusion, and then something that might have been joy. "Pregnant? Are you sure?" "I took 3 tests. They were all positive." David was quiet for a long moment, staring at their hands. When he looked up, there were tears in his eyes. "This is what we've wanted for so long," he said softly. "Sarah, this changes everything." "Does it?" "Of course it does. We're going to have a baby. We're going to be parents." Sarah studied her husband's face, searching for genuine emotion beneath what she suspected was his automatic response. "And what about Amber?" David's expression hardened slightly. "I told you I ended that." "Did you?" "Sarah, you're carrying my child. You're my wife. Of course I ended it." But even as he spoke the words, David's phone buzzed on the table between them. He glanced at it automatically, and Sarah saw his face change, just for an instant, but long enough for her to know. "Answer it," she said quietly. "It's probably work." "Answer it, David." With obvious reluctance, David picked up the phone. "Hello." Sarah couldn't hear the caller clearly, but she could tell it was a woman's voice. She watched David's face as he listened, saw the way his expression softened despite his obvious discomfort. "I can't talk right now," David said. "I'll call you back later." "No." The voice on the other end was louder now, angry. "You can't just ignore me. David, we need to figure this out." David ended the call quickly, but the damage was done. Sarah sat back in her chair, feeling something cold settle in her chest. "That was her, wasn't it?" "Sarah, you didn't end it at all. You've been lying to me for 3 weeks. It's complicated." "No, it's not complicated," Sarah said, her voice rising. Other diners were beginning to notice, but she didn't care. "You're having an affair. David, you're lying to your pregnant wife about having an affair." David leaned forward, lowering his voice. "She's been calling constantly. She won't accept that it's over. I've been trying to let her down gently." "Gently?" Sarah laughed bitterly. "You're worried about hurting your mistress's feelings while your wife sits home, wondering if her marriage has any chance of surviving. That's not fair. What's not fair is you making me feel crazy for questioning your commitment while you continue to maintain a relationship with another woman." David was quiet for a moment, his jaw working as if he were fighting some internal battle. When he finally spoke, his words destroyed any hope Sarah had been clinging to. "I care about her. Sarah, I can't just turn that off." The restaurant seemed to go silent around them. Sarah felt as if everyone in the room had heard David's confession, as if her humiliation was on display for strangers to witness. "You care about her," Sarah repeated. "I never meant for this to happen. But it did happen. And now you're telling me that even with a baby on the way, even with your wife begging you to save our marriage, you can't let go of your girlfriend because you care about her? It's not that simple." Sarah stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "It is exactly that simple. David, you have to choose. Me and our baby. Or her. You can't have both." "Sarah, sit down. People are staring." "Let them stare," Sarah said, her voice carrying across the dining room. "Let them see what happens when a man thinks he can have everything he wants without consequences." She walked out of the restaurant, leaving David sitting alone at their table. Outside, the San Francisco evening was cool and foggy, but Sarah barely felt the temperature. Her entire body was numb with the realization that her marriage was truly over. By the time she reached her car, her phone was buzzing with calls from David. She ignored them all. At home, she found David's belongings still scattered throughout their bedroom. a constant reminder of the life they had shared. On impulse, she began gathering his clothes, his toiletries, his books and electronics. When David arrived home an hour later, he found his suitcases packed and waiting by the front door. "Sarah, we need to talk about this rationally," he said. "I've been rational for 3 weeks," Sarah replied. "I've been patient and understanding and willing to work on our problems, but you can't even be honest with me." "I am being honest. You told me you ended the affair, then took a call from her at dinner. You told me our baby changes everything, then admitted you can't stop caring about another woman. How is any of that honest?" David picked up one of his suitcases. "Where am I supposed to go?" "I don't care," Sarah said, and she realized she meant it. "Go to Amber. Go to a hotel. Go wherever you want. Just don't stay here and pretend we're working things out while you continue to betray me." After David left, Sarah sat in her living room surrounded by the beautiful things they had accumulated together. The art they had chosen, the furniture they had selected, the photographs of their happy years. All of it now felt like evidence of a life that had never been as real as she had believed. She placed her hand on her still flat stomach, thinking about the baby growing inside her. This child would grow up knowing that their father had chosen someone else over their family. The thought broke her heart in a way that even David's betrayal hadn't managed, but it also made her angry. Angrier than she had ever been in her life. David might have given up on their family, but Sarah wouldn't. She would fight for her child, even if she had to do it alone. The war for her future was just beginning. Sarah's first meeting with Marcus Sterling should have been a turning point toward rebuilding her life. Instead, it became the moment she learned that David's betrayal ran deeper than she had ever imagined. Marcus came highly recommended by Jessica, who had researched family law attorneys throughout the Bay Area. His office in downtown San Francisco occupied the entire 40th floor of a glass tower, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Everything about the space suggested success, competence, and the kind of aggressive representation Sarah knew she would need. "Mrs. Reynolds," Marcus said, standing to greet her. He was a tall man in his late 30s, with silver-streaked hair and an expensive suit that suggested he commanded premium fees. "Please, sit down. I understand you're going through a difficult time." Sarah settled into the leather chair across from his massive desk, trying to project confidence despite feeling utterly lost. At 10 weeks pregnant, she was just beginning to show, and the constant nausea made everything more challenging. "I need to know what I'm entitled to," Sarah said directly. "My husband has been having an affair, and I want to end our marriage, but I need to protect myself and my unborn child." Marcus nodded, making notes on a legal pad. "How long have you been married?" 8 years. We don't have a prenuptial agreement." "And what are the major assets?" Sarah outlined their financial situation, the $5 million house. David's tech company worth approximately $50 million, their joint savings accounts, her own small interior design business, and various investments they had made together. "Your husband's company went public recently?" Marcus asked. "6 months ago. The timing is—" Sarah paused, realizing something she hadn't considered before. "Actually, his affair started around the same time as the IPO." Marcus made another note. "That could be significant. California is a community property state, which means you're entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage. If the company was built during your marriage, you could have a claim to a substantial portion of its value." For the first time since discovering David's infidelity, Sarah felt a spark of hope. Maybe she wouldn't be left with nothing. Maybe she could build a secure future for herself and her baby. "What do you need from me?" she asked. "All financial documents, bank statements, tax returns, anything related to the business. I'll also need a timeline of the affair and any evidence you have." Sarah spent the next week gathering everything Marcus had requested. She found bank statements showing unexplained charges at expensive restaurants and hotels, credit card bills for jewelry she had never received, travel receipts for business trips she now realized had included Amber. But the most damaging evidence came from David's laptop, which he had left behind in his hurry to move out. Sarah found email chains between David and his business partners discussing the IPO timeline, revealing that he had known for over a year that the company would go public. He had planned his affair to coincide with their newfound wealth. At their second meeting, Marcus reviewed all the evidence with obvious satisfaction. "This is very strong," he said. "The timing of the affair, the use of marital assets to fund it, your contributions to his business success through networking and social support. I think we can negotiate a very favorable settlement. What kind of timeline are we looking at? With this much evidence, and given your pregnancy, I expect your husband will want to settle quickly and quietly. Bad publicity could hurt his business reputation." Sarah left the meeting feeling more optimistic than she had in weeks. Marcus seemed confident and competent, and for the first time, she believed she might emerge from this disaster with enough resources to start over. That optimism lasted exactly 3 days. Sarah was at home, reviewing design portfolios for a potential new client, when her doorbell rang. Through the window, she saw a man in a suit holding an official-looking envelope. "Sarah Reynolds?" he asked when she opened the door. "Yes, you've been served." The divorce papers were filed in David's name, citing irreconcilable differences. But it was the attached financial disclosure that made Sarah's blood run cold. According to David's filing, TechFlow had been devalued significantly due to market conditions. The company that had been worth $50 million 6 months ago was now valued at less than $10 million. Their joint savings accounts, which had contained nearly $2 million, now showed balances of less than $200,000. Most shocking of all, David claimed that the house was underwater on its mortgage, worth less than they owed. Sarah called Marcus immediately. "This is impossible," she said, her voice shaking. "I know what our assets are worth." "Mrs. Reynolds, I need you to calm down," Marcus said, his tone strangely formal. "Your husband has filed first, which gives him certain advantages in how the case proceeds." "What advantages? This is all lies. The company didn't lose $40 million in value overnight. Market valuations can be complex. Marcus, these numbers are fabricated. David is hiding assets." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Marcus spoke again, his voice was different, distant. "Mrs. Reynolds, I think you should consider accepting your husband's settlement offer. Under the circumstances, it's quite generous." "What settlement offer? $500,000 in the house? No alimony, but no debt responsibility either." Sarah felt the world tilting around her. 500,000 out of 50 million. Out of 10 million, according to the current valuation. And you'd be getting the house free and clear. The house they're claiming is worthless. Mrs. Reynolds, litigation is expensive and uncertain. Your husband is offering you a clean break and financial security for you and your child. Sarah stared at the phone, pieces clicking into place with horrible clarity. "How long have you been representing David?" The silence on the other end told her everything she needed to know. "How long, Marcus?" "Mrs. Reynolds, I think you're upset and not thinking clearly." "You've been working for him all along," Sarah said, her voice deadly quiet. "Jessica recommended you because you were supposed to be the best family attorney in the city. But David got to you first, didn't he?" "I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that accusation. How much did he pay you to betray me?" Sarah hung up the phone and immediately called Jessica. "I need a new lawyer," she said when Jessica answered. "Marcus Sterling has been working for David." "That's impossible," Jessica said. "I vetted him carefully. He has an excellent reputation." "Jessica, they're claiming the company lost $40 million in value since the IPO. They're saying our house is underwater, and Marcus is trying to convince me to accept $500,000 out of what should be a $25 million settlement." There was silence on the other end as Jessica processed this information. "Sarah, if what you're saying is true, this is massive fraud. We need to document everything." But even as Jessica promised to help find a new attorney, Sarah was beginning to understand the scope of what David had done. This wasn't just an affair. This was a carefully planned financial betrayal designed to leave her with as little as possible. David hadn't just cheated on her. He had systematically destroyed her ability to fight back. That night, Sarah sat in her beautiful home, surrounded by luxury that apparently no longer belonged to her, and faced the truth. David had been planning this for months, maybe longer. While she had been trying to save their marriage, he had been working to ensure she would be left with nothing. But David had made one crucial mistake. He had underestimated exactly how far Sarah was willing to go to protect herself and her child. The real war was just beginning. The miscarriage happened on a Tuesday morning in November. exactly 16 weeks after Sarah had joyfully told David about their pregnancy. She was reviewing legal documents in her bedroom when the cramping started, sharp and insistent, followed by bleeding that sent her rushing to the emergency room alone. Dr. Martinez, her obstetrician, delivered the news with professional kindness, but Sarah barely heard the medical explanations. Stress, she understood. Her body had simply given up under the weight of everything she was carrying. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Reynolds," Dr. Martinez said. "This is no one's fault. Sometimes these things just happen." But Sarah knew better. This was David's fault, just like everything else that had fallen apart in her life. She called David from the hospital waiting room, her voice hollow as she left a voicemail. "I lost the baby. I'm at San Francisco General if you want to pretend you care." David arrived 2 hours later, still in his business suit, looking harried and uncomfortable. He found Sarah in the recovery room, staring out the window at the gray November sky. "Sarah, I'm so sorry," he said, approaching her bed cautiously. "The nurse said—" "She said we lost the baby." "I lost the baby," Sarah corrected. "You lost the right to claim any part of this when you chose Amber over your family?" David sat in the plastic visitor's chair, running his hands through his hair. "This is tragic for both of us. We both wanted this child." Sarah turned to look at him, seeing a stranger wearing her husband's face. "Did we? Because from where I'm lying, it seems like you wanted Amber more than you wanted anything else. That's not fair. What's not fair is my baby dying because their father created so much stress and chaos that my body couldn't handle carrying them." David's face crumpled. "You can't blame me for this. Medical complications aren't—" "Get out," Sarah said quietly. "Sarah, we need to talk about—" "Get out," Sarah screamed, her voice echoing down the hospital corridor. "Get out and don't come back." After David left, Sarah lay in the hospital bed and felt something inside her break that she knew would never heal. The baby had been her hope, her reason to fight, her future. Now that future was gone, and she was truly alone. The next few weeks brought a cascade of disasters that seemed designed to destroy whatever remained of Sarah's life. Her interior design business, which had been struggling since news of her divorce became public, collapsed entirely. 3 major clients canceled their contracts, citing uncomfortable personal circumstances. Sarah suspected David's influence, but couldn't prove it. Then came the house. "I'm afraid the foreclosure proceedings are already underway," said Rebecca Chen, the real estate attorney Sarah had finally been able to afford after Marcus Sterling's betrayal. "According to these documents, your husband took out a second mortgage against the property 6 months ago." "That's impossible," Sarah said, though she was beginning to learn that nothing was impossible when it came to David's deception. "I never signed any loan documents. Apparently, he used a power of attorney that you signed several years ago for a business transaction. It's legal, if ethically questionable." Sarah remembered signing that document. David had needed her signature for some routine business matter, and she had trusted him completely. That trust had now been weaponized against her. "How much does he owe?" $4.7 million, against a house that's currently appraised at $4.2 million? "So even if I could afford the payments, the house is worth less than the debt?" "I'm afraid so. And Mrs. Reynolds, I have to tell you that the second mortgage payments are already 3 months behind. The bank will likely accelerate the foreclosure process." Sarah had 60 days to find somewhere else to live. The final blow came from the most unexpected source. Jessica appeared at Sarah's door on a cold December evening, her face grim with the kind of expression that meant more bad news. "We need to talk," Jessica said, settling onto Sarah's couch. The house looked different now, with most of the expensive furniture and art already sold to pay legal fees. "Please tell me you have some good news," Sarah said, "because I don't think I can handle any more disasters." Jessica pulled out her laptop. "I've been investigating David's financial situation, trying to trace where the money went. And, Sarah, the money didn't disappear. David moved it, systematically, over the past 8 months. He's been transferring assets into offshore accounts, shell companies, and investments that are difficult to trace." Jessica showed Sarah a series of documents on her screen: bank transfers, corporate filings, investment records that painted a picture of methodical financial planning. "He's been planning this since before the IPO," Jessica continued. "The affair with Amber wasn't spontaneous. It was part of a larger plan to start over with a clean slate. How much? As far as I can tell, at least $45 million, maybe more. Sarah stared at the evidence of David's systematic betrayal. He hadn't just cheated on her and abandoned their marriage. He had spent months carefully stealing their entire future. There's more, Jessica said reluctantly. I found records of payments to Marcus Sterling dating back 9 months. David hired him long before you ever met with him. So Marcus was always working for David. It appears so. And Sarah? There are payments to other people too. Private investigators, computer specialists, financial advisors. David built an entire team to help him destroy your life. Sarah felt a strange calm settling over her. The betrayal was so complete, so thorough, that it almost seemed unreal. David hadn't just left her for another woman. He had systematically dismantled everything they had built together and stolen it for himself. What about the police? Sarah asked. This is fraud, isn't it? White-collar financial crimes are notoriously difficult to prosecute, Jessica said. David was careful. Most of the transactions are technically legal, just ethically abhorrent, and with his resources, he can hire the best attorneys in the country. So he gets away with it. Maybe, but Sarah, I've been thinking about this differently. What if we don't fight David in court? What if we fight him in the media? Sarah looked at her friend with growing interest. What do you mean? I mean, I'm an investigative journalist with access to one of the largest newspapers in California. This story has everything: tech industry corruption, marriage betrayal, financial fraud. If I write this story the right way, David's reputation will be destroyed. That doesn't get me my money back. No, but it might stop him from enjoying the life he stole from you. Sarah considered this. She had lost her marriage, her baby, her business, and her home. She had nothing left to lose. Do it, she said. Destroy him. But even as she spoke the words, Sarah knew that revenge wouldn't heal the wounds David had inflicted. Nothing could bring back her baby or restore the trust that had been shattered. All she could do now was try to survive the wreckage of her life and figure out how to build something new from nothing. The woman who had once planned perfect dinner parties and decorated million-dollar homes was about to discover exactly how strong she could be when she had no choice but to fight. Sarah's eviction from the mansion happened on a rainy Thursday in January. She stood on the marble steps she had once loved, watching movers load her remaining possessions into a small rental truck. Everything that defined her life for the past 8 years fit into a space barely larger than her former walk-in closet. Jessica waited in her car, engine running, ready to drive Sarah to her new reality, a spare bedroom in Jessica's modest apartment in Oakland. The contrast was jarring. From $5 million worth of Silicon Valley luxury to a futon in a space Jessica used as her home office. It's temporary, Jessica assured her as Sarah stared at the narrow room that would be her entire world. Just until you get back on your feet. Sarah nodded, though she couldn't imagine how she would ever stand up again. At 32, she felt ancient, hollowed out, like she had lived several lifetimes in the span of 6 months. The article Jessica had written about David's financial betrayal ran in the San Francisco Chronicle 3 weeks later, creating exactly the media firestorm they had hoped for. The headline read, "Tech mogul's elaborate scheme to defraud wife goes beyond typical divorce drama." Jessica had done her job brilliantly, painting David as a calculating predator who had systematically destroyed his pregnant wife's life to fund his affair with a younger woman. The story included photos of David and Amber at expensive restaurants, documentation of the hidden offshore accounts, and quotes from legal experts calling his actions morally reprehensible if not legally actionable. For 72 hours, David Reynolds was the most hated man in Silicon Valley, but Sarah soon learned that public humiliation and actual justice were very different things. The story hurt his reputation, but it didn't hurt his bank account, Sarah told Jessica over coffee in a downtown cafe they chose because it offered free Wi-Fi and cheap refills. He's still rich, still with Amber, still living the life he stole from me. Maybe, but his business relationships are suffering. I've heard from sources that several investors are reconsidering their partnerships with TechFlow. Sarah appreciated Jessica's optimism, but she was learning to focus on her own survival rather than David's downfall. She had been job hunting for 2 months with limited success. Her interior design portfolio was impressive, But word had spread through her professional network about her difficult personal circumstances. Nobody wanted to hire someone whose life was falling apart so publicly. "I have news," Jessica announced, setting down her coffee cup with obvious excitement. "My editor wants to offer you a position." "Doing what?" "Research and fact-checking for investigative pieces. It's entry level, but it's a real job with benefits." Sarah felt a flicker of hope. "How much does it pay?" $38,000 a year. The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had once spent more than that on a single piece of art for her living room. Her monthly clothing budget had been higher than what would now be her annual salary, but it was also the first legitimate opportunity anyone had offered her in months. "I'll take it," Sarah said. Working at the Chronicle meant learning an entirely new set of skills. Sarah had always been creative and detail-oriented, but investigative journalism required a different kind of thinking. She learned to verify sources, trace financial records, and piece together complicated stories from fragments of information. More importantly, the work gave her a sense of purpose she hadn't felt since her marriage began falling apart. "You're good at this," said Tom Bradley, the senior investigative reporter Sarah assisted most often. "You have an instinct for finding patterns that other people miss?" Sarah was researching a story about construction industry corruption when she stumbled across something that changed everything. Buried in a routine financial filing was a familiar name, TechFlow Solutions. David's company was listed as a subcontractor on a municipal building project, but the details didn't make sense. TechFlow developed artificial intelligence software for business applications. They had no experience or expertise in construction. "Tom," Sarah called across the newsroom, "can you look at something?" She showed him the documents, explaining why the partnership seemed suspicious. "You're right," Tom said, studying the papers. "This doesn't make sense unless—" He trailed off, his expression growing excited. "Sarah, I think you found something much bigger than a simple subcontracting deal." Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah and Tom followed a trail of financial connections that revealed a massive money laundering operation. TechFlow was being used to clean money from various illegal activities, including construction kickbacks, drug trafficking proceeds, and investment fraud. David wasn't just a cheating husband who had stolen from his wife. He was a criminal running a sophisticated financial crime operation. "We need to be very careful about this," Tom warned as they reviewed their evidence. "If David is involved with the kind of people we think he's involved with, this could be dangerous." But Sarah felt no fear, only a cold satisfaction. Finally, she had found something that could destroy David completely. "I want to take this to the FBI," she said. "Sarah, think about this carefully. Once we make this call, there's no going back. Your life will become even more complicated." Sarah thought about the baby she had lost, the home she had been evicted from, the marriage that had been built on lies. Her life was already completely destroyed. She had nothing left to lose. "Make the call," she said. Agent Rebecca Torres from the FBI's White-Collar Crime Division met Sarah and Tom at a downtown coffee shop 2 days later. Agent Torres was younger than Sarah had expected, with sharp eyes and an air of barely contained energy. "We've been investigating some of the people connected to TechFlow for over a year," Agent Torres said after reviewing their evidence. "But we haven't been able to penetrate the financial structure. This documentation you found could be exactly what we need." "What happens next?" Sarah asked. "We need you to help us gather more evidence." "And Mrs. Reynolds, I have to ask, would you be willing to wear a wire?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "Yes." 3 weeks later, Sarah sat in her car outside the restaurant where she had agreed to meet David. She wore a simple black dress and a wire transmitter so small she could barely feel it against her skin. In her purse was a recording device disguised as a compact mirror. She was about to do something that would either destroy David completely or put her own life in danger. But for the first time since her marriage had fallen apart, Sarah felt like she was finally fighting back. David chose their old favorite restaurant for their meeting, Chez Laurent, where he had proposed and where Sarah had told him about their pregnancy. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Sarah arrived first, choosing a corner table where the FBI's surveillance team could see everything clearly. Agent Torres had coached her extensively on how to guide the conversation toward David's business activities without seeming suspicious. "Remember," Agent Torres had said during their final briefing, "David thinks he's smarter than everyone else. Use that arrogance against him. David walked in looking confident and relaxed, wearing an expensive suit that Sarah knew cost more than her current monthly salary. Success suited him, even if it was built on crime and betrayal. "Sarah," he said, kissing her cheek in a gesture that felt like a performance. "You look beautiful. I've missed you." "Have you?" Sarah asked, settling into her chair. "From what I read in the society pages, you've been quite busy with Amber." David's smile faltered slightly. The media attention following Jessica's article had died down, but the damage to his social standing was still evident. "The press loves to blow things out of proportion," David said. "You know how it is." "Actually, I don't know how it is," Sarah replied. "I've never had my personal life dissected in the newspapers because I've never destroyed someone's life for my own entertainment." "Sarah, I asked you to dinner because I want to make things right between us." "How exactly do you plan to do that?" David reached across the table, trying to take her hand. Sarah let him, knowing the gesture would be captured by the hidden cameras. "I've been thinking about us, about what we had together," David said. "I made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I've learned from them, such as I took you for granted. I didn't appreciate how much you contributed to my success, how much you sacrificed for our marriage." Sarah felt a bitter laugh rising in her throat. "You're absolutely right. I did sacrifice everything for your success. My career, my independence, my sense of self. I made you the center of my world. And I threw it away for something that meant nothing," David said, his voice taking on the sincere tone he used in business negotiations. "Amber was a distraction, a midlife crisis that got out of hand. What you and I had was real." "Was it because it seems to me that you were planning to leave me long before you met Amber?" David's expression sharpened. "What do you mean?" This was the moment Agent Torres had prepared her for. Sarah needed to guide David toward admitting his financial crimes without making him suspicious. "I mean the financial arrangements you made," Sarah said carefully. "Moving money around, setting up offshore accounts, that takes planning." "David, that's not something you do on impulse because you meet a pretty girl." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Come on, David. We were married for 8 years. I know how your mind works. You're always planning 3 moves ahead." David was quiet for a moment, studying Sarah's face. She could see him calculating, trying to determine how much she knew and whether she posed a threat. "Business finances are complicated," he said finally, "especially when you're dealing with international markets and currency fluctuations." "Is that what you call it? What would you call it?" Sarah leaned forward, making sure her voice would be clearly picked up by the wire. "I'd call it money laundering." David's face went completely still. "That's a very serious accusation." "Sarah, is it an accusation or an observation? You're upset about the divorce settlement, so you're making wild claims." "I'm not making claims," Sarah interrupted. "I'm stating facts. TechFlow has been used to clean money from illegal activities, construction kickbacks, drug proceeds, investment fraud." "Should I go on?" David's hand tightened around his wine glass. "Sarah, you need to be very careful about what you're saying. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you that making false accusations against people can be dangerous." "What people?" David realized his mistake immediately. He had just admitted that other people were involved. People who might be dangerous if exposed. "Sarah, you don't understand the situation you're dealing with," David said, his voice lower now. "There are people involved in this who don't appreciate interference. People like Vincent Castellano." Sarah had done her research. Vincent Castellano was a construction magnate with suspected ties to organized crime. His company had been involved in several of the suspicious projects connected to TechFlow. David went pale. "How do you know that name?" "I know a lot of names, David. I know about the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the fake subcontracting deals. I know about all of it." "Sarah, listen to me very carefully," David said, leaning across the table. "You need to forget whatever you think you know and walk away from this. These aren't people you want to cross. But you did want to cross them. You wanted to steal their money along with mine." David's composure was completely gone now. "I never stole anything from Castellano. Everything was done exactly as agreed." "So you admit you were working with him?" "I admit that certain business arrangements required flexibility in how funds were processed." Sarah felt a surge of triumph. David had just confessed to money laundering on tape. And my money, she asked, was stealing from your wife part of the agreement too? Your money was collateral, David said, his voice hard. Insurance to make sure I could honor my commitments. Commitments to criminals. Commitments to business partners who don't accept failure. David suddenly seemed to realize how much he had revealed. He sat back in his chair, his expression shifting from defensive to calculating. Sarah, what exactly do you want from me? I want my life back. That's not possible. Then I want justice. David smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Justice is a luxury that people like you can't afford. You have no money, no connections, no power. I have all three. You also have federal investigators building a case against you. The words hung between them like a blade. David's face went through a series of expressions: shock, fear, and finally cold rage. You're wearing a wire, he said quietly. Sarah didn't deny it. Yes. David stood up slowly, his movement deliberate and controlled. You have no idea what you've just done. I've just destroyed a criminal who happened to be my husband. You've just signed your own death warrant. David threw a $100 bill on the table and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Sarah alone with the weight of what had just happened. She had gotten everything the FBI needed, but she had also made an enemy of people who, according to David, didn't hesitate to eliminate threats. Agent Torres appeared at her table within minutes. You did perfectly, she said. We have everything we need to arrest David and several of his associates. Tomorrow morning, federal agents will execute simultaneous warrants at TechFlow, David's home, and Amber's apartment. Sarah felt a mixture of satisfaction and terror. After months of feeling powerless, she had finally struck back. But David's warning echoed in her mind. She might have won this battle, but the war was far from over. Agent Torres, am I safe? We're going to make sure you're protected, Agent Torres replied. But Sarah, you should know that this investigation is going to get much bigger before it's over. You've helped us expose a network that extends far beyond your ex-husband. That night, Sarah lay awake in Jessica's spare room, thinking about the woman she had been a year ago, that Sarah had trusted completely, loved unconditionally, and believed that doing the right thing would always be enough. This Sarah knew better. This Sarah understood that sometimes you had to fight dirty to survive. Tomorrow, David would learn that underestimating his wife had been the biggest mistake of his criminal career. Sarah woke at 5:30 in the morning to her phone buzzing with a call from Agent Torres. It's happening now, Agent Torres said without preamble. Federal agents are executing warrants at 6 locations simultaneously. I wanted you to know that David was arrested at his apartment 20 minutes ago. Sarah sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. Was Amber with him? She was. And Mrs. Reynolds. You need to know something about Amber Wild. Her real name is Agent Amber Wilson, FBI. She's been undercover for 8 months, gathering evidence on the money laundering operation. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She's FBI, one of our best undercover agents. The affair with your husband was an assignment. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. Every photo Jessica had shown her, every moment of jealousy and betrayal she had felt, every image of David and Amber together had been orchestrated by federal law enforcement. So David never actually left me for another woman, Sarah said slowly. He left me for an FBI agent who was pretending to be his girlfriend so she could arrest him. I know this is a lot to process. Agent Torres, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. How long has the FBI known about David's activities? There was a pause on the other end of the line. We've been investigating the money laundering network for 18 months. So you knew about David before my marriage fell apart. We suspected his involvement. Yes. Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. Did you know he was going to divorce me? Mrs. Reynolds, did you know? Another pause? We believed that his personal relationships might become complicated as our investigation progressed. Complicated, Sarah repeated. Is that what you call destroying someone's life? Mrs. Reynolds, I understand you're upset. I'm not upset, Sarah said, her voice deadly calm. I'm realizing that my marriage didn't fall apart because my husband was a cheating sociopath. It fell apart because the FBI decided to use his relationship with your agent to destroy his life. and mine got destroyed as collateral damage. That's not how. Sarah hung up the phone and sat in the dark, trying to process what she had learned. David was a criminal who deserved to be arrested. But he had also been manipulated into an affair by a federal agent whose job was to seduce him into revealing his crimes. How much of David's betrayal was real, and how much had been carefully orchestrated by law enforcement? By noon, the story was everywhere. Local news stations led with footage of David being walked out of his apartment building in handcuffs. The headlines screamed about the tech mogul's spectacular fall from grace. Jessica found Sarah sitting in a downtown coffee shop, staring at her laptop screen as she read article after article about David's arrest. "How are you holding up?" Jessica asked, sliding into the chair across from her. "Did you know about Amber?" Jessica's expression told Sarah everything she needed to know. "You knew," Sarah said. "You knew she was FBI when you showed me those photos." "Where's Sarah? I had to protect the investigation. You let me believe my husband was cheating on me with some Instagram influencer when you knew she was a federal agent." "The affair was still real," Jessica said defensively. "David still chose to betray your marriage. Did he, or was he seduced by a professional who was trained to manipulate him?" Jessica was quiet for a moment. "Does it matter? David was laundering money for criminals. He deserved to be stopped. And I deserve to be collateral damage. Sarah, you've been through hell, but look where you are now. You're stronger, more independent. You have a career, a life of your own." Sarah laughed bitterly. "I lost my marriage, my baby, my home, and my entire sense of reality. But sure, I'm stronger. The baby wasn't David's fault. Wasn't it the stress of discovering his affair, the financial betrayal, the legal battles? All of that contributed to my miscarriage." "Sarah, you can't blame the FBI for—" "I'm not blaming the FBI," Sarah interrupted. "I'm blaming all of you. David, the FBI, you, everyone who decided that catching a criminal was worth destroying an innocent person's life." That afternoon, Sarah received a call from an unknown number. "Mrs. Reynolds, this is Agent Amber Wilson." Sarah felt her breath catch, hearing the voice that had tormented her dreams for months, knowing now that it belonged to someone who had been paid to seduce her husband. "What do you want?" "I want to apologize, and I want to explain." "There's nothing to explain. You did your job." "It's not that simple. Mrs. Reynolds, can we meet? There are things you need to know about your husband that go beyond what you learned in court." Against her better judgment, Sarah agreed to meet Amber at a small cafe near the waterfront. When she arrived, she was struck by how different the woman looked without the glamorous styling she had worn in all the surveillance photos. Amber Wilson looked tired, older, more human. "Thank you for coming," Amber said. "I know this must be incredibly difficult for you. You have no idea what this has been like for me." "Actually, I do. Mrs. Reynolds, I've been undercover for 8 months, which means I've spent 8 months listening to your husband talk about you." Sarah felt her composure crack slightly. "What did he say?" "He said you were the best thing that ever happened to him. He said he didn't deserve you. He said he was terrified that you would find out about his business activities and leave him. But he filed for divorce because I convinced him to." "Mrs. Reynolds, that was my job. To make David believe that leaving you was his idea, that starting over with me was what he wanted." Sarah stared at this woman who had destroyed her life while trying to save it. "So David never really wanted to leave me." "He was trapped," Amber said. "The people he was laundering money for had made it clear that his family could be used as leverage against him. David thought divorcing you would protect you. Protect me. Vincent Castellano and his associates don't hesitate to hurt family members to ensure compliance. David was terrified that they would target you." Sarah felt the world shifting around her again. "So David divorced me to protect me, but you convinced him it was because he loved you. It was the only way to get him to cooperate with our investigation while keeping you safe." "Safe?" Sarah's voice rose. "I lost everything. My marriage, my baby, my home, my entire life." "But you're alive," Amber said quietly. "Mrs. Reynolds, 3 other people connected to this investigation have been murdered in the past year. David's decision to distance himself from you probably saved your life." Sarah sat in stunned silence, processing this final revelation. Her husband hadn't betrayed her for another woman. He had sacrificed their marriage to protect her from criminals who wouldn't hesitate to kill her, and she had helped the FBI destroy him for it. "Why are you telling me this now?" Sarah asked. "Because David is going to prison for a long time, and you deserve to know the truth about why your marriage really ended." Sarah looked at Amber Wilson, this woman who had played the role of her husband's lover so convincingly that Sarah had nearly destroyed herself with jealousy and rage. "What happens now? Now you get to decide who you want to be," Amber said. "The woman who was a victim of circumstances beyond her control, or the woman who survived them." As Sarah walked back to Jessica's apartment, she realized that she had spent the past year fighting the wrong enemy. David wasn't the villain in her story. He was just another casualty of a world where ordinary people got caught up in extraordinary circumstances. But knowing the truth didn't change the fact that her life had been destroyed. It just meant she had to figure out how to rebuild it with a completely different understanding of everything that had happened. The woman who had once planned perfect dinner parties was about to discover what it meant to start over with nothing but the truth. The federal courthouse was packed with media and curious onlookers when David's sentencing hearing began 6 months later. Sarah sat in the back row, having requested permission to deliver a victim impact statement. She had spent weeks writing and rewriting her words, trying to capture the complexity of what David had done and what it had cost both of them. David looked different in his orange jumpsuit, smaller somehow, as if months in federal detention had diminished more than just his freedom. When he saw Sarah in the courtroom, his face showed a mixture of relief and regret that made her heart ache despite everything. The prosecution presented their case efficiently. David had pleaded guilty to money laundering, financial fraud, and conspiracy charges. The evidence was overwhelming, and his cooperation with ongoing investigations had earned him a reduced sentence recommendation of 12 years in federal prison. "Your Honor," Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh said, "the defendant orchestrated a sophisticated criminal enterprise that laundered over $60 million in illegal proceeds. His actions enabled drug trafficking, construction corruption, and investment fraud that harmed countless innocent victims." David's attorney presented their mitigation case, emphasizing his cooperation, his lack of prior criminal history, and the personal costs he had already paid. Mr. Reynolds lost his marriage, his business, and his reputation. Defense attorney Michael Chang argued, "He has already paid a significant price for his crimes." Then it was Sarah's turn to speak. She walked to the podium slowly, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. David watched her with an expression of desperate hope, as if her words might somehow change his fate. "Your Honor," Sarah began, "my name is Sarah Reynolds, and I was married to the defendant for 8 years. Her voice was steady, stronger than she had expected. "When I first learned about David's crimes, I was angry. I felt betrayed, abandoned, destroyed by someone I had trusted completely. I blamed him for the loss of my marriage, my home, my pregnancy, and my sense of security." Sarah paused, looking directly at David. "But over the past months, I've learned that the situation was more complicated than I initially understood. David didn't choose to become a criminal for personal gain. He was coerced by people who threatened violence against his family. When he tried to protect me by ending our marriage, he made that decision based on advice from law enforcement agents who convinced him it was the only way to keep me safe." She saw surprise on the faces of the prosecutors, who had not expected her to defend David. "None of this excuses David's choices," Sarah continued. "He could have come to me, could have trusted me with the truth, could have found another way to handle the situation. Instead, he chose to lie, to manipulate, and to commit crimes that harmed innocent people." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "But I want this court to understand that David Reynolds is not the monster that some media accounts have portrayed. He is a man who made terrible decisions while trying to navigate an impossible situation. He is someone who lost his way and caused tremendous harm to people he loved while trying to protect them." She looked at David again, seeing tears in his eyes. "Your Honor, I have rebuilt my life since our marriage ended. I have discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, and I have learned to value my independence and self-reliance. In some ways, the destruction of my old life led to the creation of a better one." Sarah paused, gathering her thoughts for her conclusion. "I don't ask this court for mercy because David deserves it. I ask for justice that acknowledges the full complexity of what happened here, David needs to face consequences for his actions, but he also deserves the chance to rebuild his life after he has paid that price. When Sarah finished speaking, the courtroom was silent. She walked back to her seat, feeling lighter somehow, as if speaking the truth had released her from the anger and bitterness she had carried for so long. Judge Patricia Henley sentenced David to 10 years in federal prison, 2 years less than the prosecution had requested. "Mr. Reynolds," Judge Henley said, "your crimes were serious and had far-reaching consequences. However, I am persuaded by the evidence of your cooperation and by the testimony of your ex-wife that there were mitigating factors in your case." After the hearing, Sarah waited outside the courthouse as David was led away to begin his sentence. He saw her through the window of the transport van and mouthed the words, "Thank you." Sarah nodded, feeling a sense of closure she hadn't expected. Agent Torres approached as the van disappeared into traffic. "That was a generous statement," she said, "considering everything you've been through." "It was an honest statement," Sarah replied. "David made terrible choices, but he's not a terrible person." "What will you do now?" Sarah looked out at the city where she had built her first life, lost it, and was now building her second one. "I'm going to keep rebuilding," she said. "But this time, I'm building something that belongs entirely to me." 6 months later, Sarah stood in the main conference room of the San Francisco Chronicle, addressing a room full of investors and media executives. She wore a navy blue suit she had bought with money from her own salary, and her confidence came from achievements that belonged to no one but herself. "The Reynolds Foundation for Financial Crime Victims," she announced, "will provide legal assistance, counseling services, and financial support for people whose lives have been destroyed by white-collar crime." The foundation was Sarah's idea, funded by a settlement she had negotiated with TechFlow's insurance company and supported by donations from tech industry leaders who had been horrified by David's crimes. "Too often," Sarah continued, "the victims of financial crime are forgotten while we focus on punishing the perpetrators. Families lose their homes, their savings, their futures because someone else decided to steal. The Reynolds Foundation will make sure those victims have the resources they need to rebuild their lives." After the presentation, Jessica approached with obvious pride. "I can't believe you did this," Jessica said. "Turning your own trauma into something that helps other people?" "I learned something important over the past 2 years," Sarah replied. "Revenge doesn't heal anything, but helping other people can." That evening, Sarah returned to her small apartment in Oakland, the same space where she had lived when her world was falling apart. But now it felt like home rather than a temporary shelter. The walls were covered with photos from her new life colleagues from the Chronicle, volunteers from the foundation, friends she had made on her own rather than through David's business connections. On her desk was a letter that had arrived that morning, postmarked from the federal prison in Colorado where David was serving his sentence. "Dear Sarah," it read, "I know I have no right to contact you, and I'll understand if you don't want to read this. But I needed you to know how grateful I am for what you said at my sentencing. You could have destroyed me completely, and instead you told the truth about a situation that had no good choices." The letter continued for 2 pages, with David taking full responsibility for his crimes while also expressing genuine remorse for the pain he had caused. "I think about you every day," he wrote, "and I hope you found the happiness you deserve. You were always stronger than either of us realized." Sarah folded the letter and placed it in a box with other mementos from her previous life. She had forgiven David, not because he deserved it, but because carrying anger was too heavy for the life she was trying to build. The woman who had once defined herself as David Reynolds' wife was now Sarah Mitchell, investigative journalist, foundation director, and survivor. She had learned that sometimes the worst things that happen to you can become the foundation for the best things you build for yourself. Her marriage had been built on someone else's dreams. Her new life was built on her own choices, her own values, and her own strength. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. 2 years later, Sarah stood before a packed auditorium at Stanford University, delivering the keynote address for their annual Women in Leadership Conference. The woman addressing 500 aspiring female leaders bore little resemblance to the broken wife who had once sat on Jessica's futon, wondering how she would survive. 3 years ago, Sarah began, her voice carrying clearly through the auditorium, "I thought I knew exactly who I was. I was David Reynolds' wife. I was the woman behind a successful man. I was someone who had achieved her dreams by helping someone else achieve his. The audience was completely silent, hanging on her every word. Today, I want to talk to you about what happens when the life you've built around someone else's dreams collapses. What happens when you discover that the person you trusted most has been lying to you? What happens when you lose everything you thought defined you? Sarah clicked to the next slide in her presentation, showing a photo of herself from 3 years ago at a charity gala, standing next to David in an expensive gown, smiling the perfect smile of a perfect corporate wife. This woman had no idea that her husband was laundering money for criminals. She had no idea that federal agents were investigating her household finances. She had no idea that in 6 months, she would be living in a friend's spare room, working an entry-level job, and learning to rebuild her life from nothing. The next slide showed Sarah's current business card, Sarah Mitchell, Director, Reynolds Foundation for Financial Crime Victims. This woman knows exactly who she is. She knows her own strength, her own values, and her own worth. She knows that her identity doesn't depend on anyone else's success or approval. Sarah paused, making eye contact with several young women in the front row. The path between these two women was the hardest thing I've ever experienced. I lost my marriage, my financial security, my home, and my sense of who I was. But I gained something more valuable, the knowledge that I could survive anything. After her speech, Sarah was surrounded by students and professionals who wanted to share their own stories or ask for advice. One young woman, probably in her early 20s, waited until the crowd had dispersed. "Miss Mitchell," she said nervously, "I wanted to thank you for sharing your story. My mom went through something similar when my dad embezzled money from his company. She's been struggling to find her identity again." "What's your mom's name?" Sarah asked. "Catherine Walsh. She used to be an accountant before she got married, but she's been out of the workforce for 15 years. Sarah pulled out her business card and wrote a note on the back. "Have your mom call me. The foundation has a program that helps women re-enter the workforce after financial trauma. We can connect her with training programs, mentorship, and job placement assistance." As Sarah drove back to San Francisco that evening, she reflected on how different her life had become. The foundation now helped over 300 families per year, and Sarah had been invited to speak at conferences across the country. She had discovered a talent for public speaking and advocacy that she never knew she possessed. Her phone rang as she crossed the Bay Bridge. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize. "Hello, this is Sarah Mitchell. Miss Mitchell, this is Warden Johnson from the Federal Correctional Institution in Colorado. I'm calling about David Reynolds." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Is he all right?" "He's fine physically, but he's requested permission to contact you about something important. Normally, we don't facilitate communication between inmates and ex-spouses, but the circumstances are unusual." "What circumstances?" "Mr. Reynolds has information about additional victims of the criminal network he was involved with. He wants to provide that information to your foundation, but he'll only speak with you directly." Sarah pulled over to the side of the road, her hands shaking slightly. She hadn't spoken to David since his sentencing hearing 2 years ago. "What kind of information?" "Financial records that could help you identify people who were defrauded but haven't come forward yet. Mr. Reynolds apparently kept detailed records of all the illegal transactions." Sarah thought about the families they hadn't been able to help because they didn't know they existed. People who had lost money to the criminal network but didn't understand what had happened to them. "I'll speak with him," she said. A week later, Sarah sat in a sterile visiting room at the federal prison in Colorado, waiting for David to be brought in. She was nervous, unsure how seeing him again would affect her after all this time. When David entered the room, Sarah was struck by how much he had changed. He was thinner, grayer, and carried himself differently. Prison had aged him, but there was also something in his expression that seemed more genuine than the polished confidence he had worn during their marriage. "Sarah," he said, sitting across from her at the metal table. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. The warden said you have information that could help victims." "I do. But first, I need to say something that I should have said years ago." David looked directly into her eyes. "I'm sorry. Not just for the crimes, not just for the lies, but for not trusting you enough to tell you the truth when everything started falling apart." Sarah studied his face. looking for signs of manipulation or self-serving behavior. But David seemed genuinely different, humbled in a way she had never seen before. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "When Castellano's people first approached you, when you realized you were getting in too deep, why didn't you come to me?" "Because I was arrogant," David said simply. "I thought I could handle it on my own. I thought I could protect you by keeping you ignorant. I was wrong about everything." David reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a small notebook. "I kept records of every transaction, every person who was defrauded, every detail of the operation. The FBI has some of this information, but not all of it. There are victims they don't know about." He slid the notebook across the table. "I want you to have this. Use it to help people I helped hurt." Sarah opened the notebook and saw pages of meticulous handwriting detailing names, amounts, dates, and methods of fraud. It was a roadmap to finding victims who had fallen through the cracks of the federal investigation. "David, this could help dozens of families." "I hope so. It's the only way I can think of to make amends for what I did." They talked for another hour about the foundation's work, about the people Sarah had been able to help, about David's life in prison. He was taking college courses, working in the prison library, and volunteering with a program that helped other inmates prepare for re-entry into society. "I've learned something in here," David said as their visit was ending. "Success isn't about how much money you make or how impressive your title is. It's about whether you can look at yourself in the mirror and respect what you see. It took prison to teach you that. It took losing you to teach me that," David replied. "But I was too stubborn to admit it until I had time to really think about what I'd thrown away." As Sarah prepared to leave, David asked one final question. "Are you happy? Sarah, really happy?" Sarah considered the question seriously. "Yes, I am. Not in the way I thought I wanted to be happy when we were married, but in a way that feels more real, more sustainable." "Good," David said, and she could see that he meant it. "You deserve that." 6 months later, the information David had provided led to the foundation helping 43 additional families recover over $2 million in stolen assets. Sarah published an article about the experience in the Chronicle, exploring the complex questions of redemption, forgiveness, and how people can find meaning after devastating mistakes. The article generated hundreds of responses from readers sharing their own stories of betrayal, loss, and recovery. Many of them became volunteers or donors for the foundation. On a quiet Sunday evening, Sarah sat in her apartment preparing for a board meeting the next day. The foundation was expanding to serve victims in 3 additional states, and Sarah was being considered for a position with a national advocacy organization. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jessica. "Saw your article. David's lucky you're a better person than he ever deserved." Sarah smiled and typed back, "We're all lucky when we get chances to become better than we used to be." As she looked out her window at the San Francisco skyline, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 3 years ago, she had been a woman whose entire identity was built around someone else's life. Tonight, she was someone who had created something meaningful from the wreckage of that life. The millionaire had left his wife for what he thought was a model, but what he had actually left was a woman who would become far more powerful than he had ever been. Not because of money or status, but because of the strength that comes from surviving the worst and choosing to help others do the same. Sarah's story had started with betrayal and loss, but it had become something much more important, a testament to the possibility of rebuilding, recovering, and discovering that sometimes the person you become after losing everything is exactly who you were meant to be. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button to let me know you want more real-life dramas like this one. Drop a comment below and tell me, would you have made the same choices Sarah did? And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell, because I bring you incredible true stories of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances every single week. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.